ChoralEd. Welcome to another episode of ChoralEd. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. Today we're taking a deeper dive into the mixing console, or the mixer, and I've subtitled this "So Many Buttons," and it can be true. As we look at this, there can be a lot of buttons on a mixer. This is a pretty pared down version of a mixer, so there's not so many buttons to be dealing with, but it can be an issue when you see certain analog or digital mixers that have 32 channels and all these different types of buttons. But we'll just give an intro and an overview of all these buttons today. To start, I group all the switches and buttons into three categories. The first is volume controls, the second is buttons, and the third is rotary knobs. So starting with the first one here, oh, and before I jump into this, let me also note, because this is a pared down version of the mixer, I will be showing images up here in the top corner of what you may encounter, as some of these things are not on this specific mixer. But anyway, starting with volume controls. The first is that, to note, there are two main volume controls in each channel. There will be a gain, and if you can read that there, a gain rotary knob technically, and a volume fader. So this is actually a rotary knob. All these are rotary knobs. On this one, probably to save space, a fader would have the vertical slider that moves up and down, but we call it a fader, and a gain knob. Gain is going to be there for sure. The other item that we might encounter is the master fader, or master knob here, and that is controlling the main output of all the sounds going to the mixer, what is coming out. But for each channel, there's a gain and a fader, or a knob in this case, that we might encounter. So here's a fader, just so you can see that in the main master fader. So one of the main questions might be, well, what is the difference between gain and the fader? And that is a very important question, and it's a little unusual, but it has a very specific purpose here. The gain is controlling the input volume to this channel, right? And it may be, in different instruments and different vocalists will have different volumes coming into the channel. You might have someone who's really quiet and you may have to crank this gain up really high because they're so quiet. Or you may have this electric guitar that is just blaring loud, and if it's way up here, then, whoa, you're gonna blow your ears out, so you're gonna turn the gain down. There's different reasons to that. Well, you might say, well, why don't you just do that here? Well, what you're trying to do is set the gain to a decent, high level without it being overly loud and always peaking and other things like that, where we get distortion. We're getting a little bit more technical now. But once you set the gain, you don't mess with it. And then you're going to use the faders to adjust the level. The other really important thing that I didn't mention yet about the gain is it controls the other elements within the channel. This might be your aux sends to monitors, or your sends to effects, reverb, things like that. And so if the gain's really low, well, then the reverb's not activating, and then you could have this cranked way up, and you're not really getting the effects that you want, or you can't hear it in the monitors. And so that gain level is really important. And how you can tell, usually there's going to be an LED kind of lighting, like you see here, on each channel, and you'll see it light up. And usually green is good, yellow, okay, red, not good. You're peaking, or you're getting too high. This specific mixer, it's not that great, and so I was testing it out, and the leveling was not really working as I would hope. But as you can see here, there's a 0 right in the center with a little arrow pointing to it, kind of saying, hey, this is what you want to aim for. So look for that green. Maybe you're hitting yellow a little bit for your gain, and that's good. And then you adjust how loud or soft and you can get more detail out of the fader then, right? So that is the difference between gain and faders. The next category we have here is buttons. The one that you don't see here is a mute button or an on button, and that usually occurs kind of just above the fader after all the other dials and so forth. And before, I would say in the past, it was exclusively almost mute buttons. That once it's pressed and the light is on, well, that means that it is muted and there's no sound coming from that channel specifically. Nowadays, it feels like that companies and makers are moving towards the on button. And so when you press it, it will light up green or some color, and it says on, right? And so that channel is now active. And so it's just a different way of thinking about it. One is mute, where when it's active, it's turned off. And one is an on button, and when it's active, it's turned on. That threw me off a little bit, having worked so much with mute buttons more than switching over to on, and it just seemed kind of odd at first. But either one makes sense, and I think you'll probably encounter more of that on button. I feel like that is becoming more common for companies and mixer makers, creators are using. Another button you may encounter, here is a quick example, if I didn't put it already up there, of the mute and on buttons that you might encounter. Another button you might encounter, and they're on analog boards for sure, not on this one that I'm holding, as well as digital mixers. They're kind of hidden in there. But these are called assign buttons and routing switches. So on a mixer, to the right of the fader usually, you'll see 3 or more buttons. Here's an image of what you might see. One will say 1, 2. The next button will say 3, 4. And then the third button will say main, left, right, or just LR. Right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, LR, 3 buttons. Like, what is that all about? Well, as I said, the title of these are assign buttons or routing switches, routing buttons. And they tell the channel where to send that signal. And I might say, well, why is it not sending it to the main outs? Why is it going somewhere else? The 1, 2 button is a subgroup, 1 and 2. The 3, 4 is a subgroup, 3, 4. And what you would use those for is you would assign, let's say, channels 1 through 5 to subgroup 1, 2, and channels 6 through 10 to subgroup 3, 4, and maybe 1 through 5 is your vocalist, and 6 through 10 are your instrumentalists. And so you want to have separate subgroups, and you can control those with a different fader. So there's a subgroup fader for you. It says 1, 2, and 3, 4 on it. And you send that to the subgroups first to have better, more control over a larger group of performers, right? There's different reasons to use subgroups and different ways to use subgroups, and that's an option there. And then it goes to the main outs. The other option is to press the LR button, and it does not go through a subgroup, and it goes to the main left, right, out. That's LR for left, right, main, out. So it is a little confusing, and I would say this is the number one issue, especially on analog boards, that I encounter when people go, oh, it's not working. They call me up. When I was teaching high school, they call me up and go, oh, I'm at the middle school, the sound's not working, I can't get any sound out. I drive over there, I press that one button, LR, on that channel, check, it's working, right? That is a critical button that if it is not pressed, the LR, main left right button, it is not sending the signal anywhere. It just stops at the end of the channel. So you're like, well, why does it have it? Well, it's because of the subgroups to give you that option. And so it makes it a little bit more complex. And without that button being pressed, the LR, main left right button on each channel that you're using, it will not work. So a little unfortunate there, a little confusing, I understand, but really important. The last item I want to talk about are the rotary knobs. And this mixer actually has everything as a rotary knob, these twist dials, as we can call it. So the gains are rotary knobs already. But the next one we want to talk about are the EQ. Here's kind of a picture of an analog board. I'll also show you a digital mixing board, which will be quite different as far as the dials and what the options are. It has a lot more options. But here, on this mixer, the green dials, green rotary knobs, are the EQ. We have a high EQ and a low EQ. Now, to demonstrate what these do, I think a lot of people are already familiar with EQ. It is the high and low sounds, frequencies of all the sounds we're getting. So let me plug this back in real fast. Check, 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 1, 2. Check, check, check. Oh, the main was down. That happens sometimes. The main knob, rotary knob, I had turned down just to make sure it didn't pop. So the low, if we have too much low, check, 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 check. See, if I take that out, then there's no low. If I put too much, well, then it gets all woofy and we can't understand what I'm saying, right, with all that down there. So usually I start with the EQ at 0, and that's usually straight up. The 0 is straight up and down. I'll start there. And then if I go, oh, well, it needs a little bit more clarity in the sound, then I'll lower the low just a little bit. Check, check, right, because then I sound a little more high voice, but it's more clear. Check, 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 1, 2. Not clear. Check, 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 check. A little bit more clear. You can also adjust the highs, right, to get more text. If you get a lot of that's the high. I can also adjust it so I sound a little more nasally. Get a lot of that. If you get a lot of sound up there, you can just. So there's just 2 knobs on this specific mixer for controlling the EQ. You could have 3 or more, up to maybe 4 or 5 rotary knobs for the EQ on an analog mixing board. A digital board, as you see here, has a lot more different options and choices. It becomes much more complex, and we won't talk about that. I also want to talk about another rotary knob, and that is the aux and monitor sends. So the auxes are usually above the EQs, below the gain, and above the EQs, and then the faders here at the bottom. So there's no aux channels on here, but these are kind of, in essence, separate sends. I talked about that 1, 2, 3, 4 button for the subgroups. In some ways, that's what this is, a little bit. Maybe the closest connection to think about it as that way. So the aux, we're going to control the volume of maybe a monitor. So we'll have aux 1, and then instead of the main left, right, out, you will also have a monitor 1 out and a monitor 2 out on these bigger mixers. And from there, these monitors are going to the stage for the performers to hear themselves. Or maybe hear a track that's playing back. And so to get that track to play from those monitors, you need to turn whatever aux channel you have it plugged into. So if those monitors are plugged into aux monitor output 1, aux output 1, well, then you'll control it with that knob. So every channel you would adjust. Like I mentioned earlier, the gain comes into play here. It's very important, the level that's at, because you're also controlling the level for that. The fader is not controlling your monitor level, just the aux knob. There may also be auxiliary. Aux is short for auxiliary. Maybe aux knobs for, that sounds like a funny word, aux knobs, sorry. I said that and then thought about how silly it sounded. They may be knobs, auxiliary knobs, for effects, reverb, things like that. And so you control the amount of reverb by adjusting that knob. Different boards have different effects and different things that they can do with those auxiliary knobs. The last I want to talk about is the pan, P-A-N. And the pan is not on this mixer again. Here's an image of what it might look like. But it would occur just below the EQ and above the fader, the slider, somewhere in here. And the pan is adjusting left and right. So if I turn it all the way to the left, the knob, well then it will only come out of the left speaker. If I turn it all the way to the right, well then that's only coming out of the right speaker. In our last episode, we talked about main left and right outs and why you need both. Only one is plugged in here for now. Well, that is changing the pan. That dial could be turned one way by accident, and you're like, well, why can I only hear it out of the left side? Well, that's the pan. The reason you do this is to give the sound and to adjust the pan is you give the sound more depth. Instead of everything just being here down the middle, well, now you have this sound that goes this way, and you have like maybe guitars are turned, one guitar is turned more to a little bit to the left, about 10, 15 degrees. And then one guitar is turned to the right. And so then you have this kind of separation, this spaciousness. Like I mentioned in the last episode also, we have, I think I mentioned it, we have two ears, left and right, and we get different sounds from both. Well, that is what we need to create in our panning. As a more complex topic, as far as how to do that, your vocals will pretty much stay in the center, but just check that they're in the center or they're where you want them to be. So there you go. There is the introduction to the mixing console. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope you continue to inspire the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.